self-reliance, which is that people go to the extreme of the opposite. And so instead of creating codependency, they go to the other side. They excessively rely on independence and their resourcefulness. They over-rely on their independence and their resourcefulness. And a lot of times they really struggle to connect with others, and they tend to operate, this is more like the lone wolf sort of idea. And it's that I don't need anybody, I can do everything myself, because if I allow somebody into my circle, they're going to criticize me, they're going to tear me apart, they're going to hold me back, they're going to do all those things that you fear. The problem with self-reliance is that in some ways it's good depending on cultures and things like that, but anything to the extreme is unhealthy. You know those voices in your head that are super critical, and sometimes they sound like one of your parents or caregivers when you were growing up? Well, there's actual research that shows that parental criticism increases your probability of developing depression. And the more severe parental criticism can actually influence your personality development, increasing the probability and likelihood that you develop personality disorders like BPD, borderline personality disorder, NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and the whole host of other personality disorders, right, that are also included in the DSM-5. So in this video, we're going to talk about those 13 traits associated with parental criticism. And the first one is self-esteem. So we're not surprised that that belief in unworthiness and this sense of lack of love and respect comes out of that parental criticism. Because a lot of times if you hear a lot of negatives, you internalize that. That's what helps to create what I call family in the head. And I got that term from Laura Smith Benjamin, brilliant psychologist. I talk about it in a lot of my other videos, things like that. And it's this chorus in your brain that tells you it can be positive or negative. But people with mental health conditions, remember, I said conditions, not necessarily disorders, but people with mental health conditions, what happens is that family in the head is really loud and really negative, and that impacts your self-esteem. And this can even influence maybe poor eye contact, that slumped over posture, right, where you're looking at the ground. You don't have a lot of that confidence, and it can even impact difficulty with you advocating for yourself. This is very true. When we see this sense of self-esteem and how the individual projects themselves because of that family in the head, because of that low self-esteem trait, it's an aspect of parental criticism. Now, the next one, that's perfectionism. And this is kind of going to the other side, so to speak, which is that you're striving for these impossible standards to avoid failure, which is interesting because these perfectionistic standards typically are poorly defined, right? So you don't know if you're reaching that goal. You don't know if you're progressing towards that goal. You're moving away from that goal. Because that sense of perfectionism, a lot of times we don't define it. So we feel like, well, I'll know it when I get there. And that's like driving to Disney World, just saying, well, I'm going to go east because I'm in Texas. So I'm going to go east and, I don't know, I'll find it. That's a problem, right? Because the probability of getting there, although if I go east, I may run into it eventually. But why not be more efficient? Why not manage it? And perfectionism often implies that it is going to be just right. It's going to have that little to it, right? That perfect semblance. And what can happen is people that have perfectionism, that they have trouble completing a task because of that high perfectionism, that any deviation from their expectation that equals perfectionism, they give up. Well, it's not going to be perfect, so heck with it. The reality is nothing's really perfect, right? And that's not a negative statement. That's a realistic-based statement. Doesn't mean everything isn't good. Doesn't mean everything can't have value. Doesn't mean everything can't be fun. Doesn't mean it can't be interesting. What it means is that it's not perfect, and things don't have to be perfect. Like life, everything is a process, and it's going forward. But that parental criticism, right? It tells you, well, this has to be perfect. Otherwise, it has no value. This has to show every step of the way that it is perfectionism. And if it doesn't, then you're broken, you're wrong, and you should give up, or you're so much of a failure. What's the point? Which takes us back to the first point, right? That low self-esteem. So moving on, this develops this low or negative self-talk. And negative self-talk is absolutely that family in the head. And that is the internalization of that parental criticism. And it's this internal chorus, right, that tells you the mistakes you made, how everybody else can see it, and what a failure you are, and how you can't complete this, and how you can't do that, and all this stuff. And it tends to create a lens in which you over-focus on the negative. So anything positive, it gets minimized. Anybody could do that. But the negative, that's all you. That's a really unbalanced scale. That doesn't make any sense. So only the negatives are all you, but the positives anybody could do. What's that? And what happens is that harsh criticism from that family in the head, it can really hold you back in your life from really aspiring for the relationship you want, for the job that you want, for the degree that you want, for you attaining your goal, because it's absolutely related to, could be perfection, isn't that perfect life, and could be low self-esteem. So that negative self-talk, that family in the head, that chorus that really perpetuates this whole belief because you've internalized that paternal criticism. And moving on to the next one, difficulty accepting compliments. And this absolutely, of course, relates to the other three. All of these are going to be related. So I'll just tell you that out. Okay. So difficulty accepting compliments. A lot of us feel that if we accept a compliment, that it means we're narcissistic or that we're full of ourselves. It absolutely doesn't. And I want to encourage you to accept compliments. Someone gives you a compliment, don't negate it. What I want you to do is just say, thank you. Just say, thank you. That's it. And even though inside you may have this sense of it feels undeserved or a little confused about it, like, are you trying to manipulate me? Are you trying to take advantage of me by saying something nice, whatever it is? Don't look at it anything more than somebody saying something nice to you. That's it. And please internalize those compliments. Believe that they're true. We don't want to go back to that negative lens where somebody gives us a compliment, so we're going to minimize it. Oh, well, they don't know me. Oh, they weren't there when it happened. Oh, they don't, No, just accept it and say thank you. And it's really important. And don't then engage in a discussion where you downplay whatever someone else is giving you a compliment about. Don't do that, because then what happens is that person is like, you didn't even appreciate what I said. Why are we having this conversation? And you don't want to continue conversations that focus on your negatives, that focus on your failures, because you got to be cautious of people like that, because those are people that overly focus on your negatives. We want to focus on your positives so that you can grow, and turning down that family in the head, turning down that volume in your head that came out of parental criticism. Number 5 is being hypercritical of others. And this is that you've internalized that critical nature of others, that whenever someone does something, you look for the negative. You're identifying the negative. You've internalized the trait that your parental critic instilled in you. But remember how you felt. You didn't feel good about it. Don't be hypercritical of others. It's not going to help people do things more successfully. That's the fallacy about parental criticism, is that they believe that if I criticize you enough, make you feel broken enough, small enough, that then you'll miraculously do things different, function better, and all of a sudden you'll become this winner, superhero. It just doesn't work that way. You internalize the negative and you breed it inside, and it manifests, and then it locks you in place in life. And that's when we get into poor relationships, poor jobs, poor outcomes, whatever it may be. We don't want to do that. So that hypercritical nature of others, resist it. Don't act the way others acted towards you that created that negative aspect of family in the head, that made you feel broken, small, uncertain about yourself. Resist that. Hyperdefensiveness, that's the next one. Now that hyperdefensiveness, what happens is that because you expect criticism on a continual basis, you're always on guard for it. The odds are pretty good that if you do this, that you have a lot of anxiety. It's really hard to relax, and you may fly off the handle. You may have anger management issues because of that hyper-defensive attitude. Everybody's going to come at you with a critique, criticism to make you feel broken, small, unsure of yourself, whatever it may be. We got to be aware of it and pull back on that. Remember that you want to encourage others to be their best, and hopefully the people in your life encourage you to be your best. Like my channel is designed to encourage you to be your best. That's what we should be consuming. That's what's so important. And moving on to the next one, people pleasing. Now, because of that internalized parent, family in the head, that all of that criticism, you feel like, well, I'll just do whatever you want me to do, or I'll try to anticipate what makes you happy so that you can avoid future criticism. Well, the problem is that then you end up in a cycle of trying to be a fortune teller. Well, you must need this, you must need that. But when we're guessing or we're trying to interpret or we're trying to sort of engage in things in the future that we think other people may need, the odds are pretty good that we're going to be wrong. And the odds are pretty good that we're going to have trouble helping those people doing those things that we want to do. And then when they don't respond, remember this can go back to our perfectionism, when they don't respond the way we expect them to, perfectly, then we feel criticized, rejected, feel abandoned in some cases, can feel guilty, unsure about yourself, have a lot of self-doubt, so on and so forth. So that people-pleasing can set you up really for a cycle of not only codependency, but also can set you up for a cycle of feeling pretty let down, unimportant, unheard, and unseen in your life. Got to resist that because it's driven, again, by that family in the head, right? That parental criticism. These are these different traits that have come out of that. And when we talk about self-reliance, so in some cases, it can be people who go to the other side. And that's our next one, self-reliance, which is that people go to the extreme of the opposite. And so instead of creating codependency, they go to the other side. They excessively rely on independence and their resourcefulness. They over-rely on their independence and their resourcefulness. And a lot of times they really struggle to connect with others, and they tend to operate, this is more like the lone wolf sort of ideal. And it's that I don't need anybody, I can do everything myself, because if I allow somebody into my circle, they're going to criticize me, they're going to tear me apart, they're going to hold me back, they're going to do all those things that you fear. The problem with self-reliance is that in some ways it's good depending on cultures and things like that, but anything to the extreme is unhealthy. Having a belief in your independence and belief in your ability to complete things, agency, self-efficacy, those are great. But if you're overly self-reliant, you don't ask for help, you don't accept help, and it's constant burden on you. You're exhausted. And then what happens? That exhaustion, the people that are around you, you tend to look at them like, well, thanks a lot. Nobody ever helps me anyway. The people that I know that are overly self-reliant often feel that nobody wants to help them. Interestingly, they never ask for help, and they're overly self-reliant. So people think, oh, well, you don't have to help Dan. Dan's got it. Dan's going to figure it out. Does it himself. And then if people do offer, we're quick to say, no, I got it, man. I got it. Right? Because we are on the extreme of being self-reliant. Now our next one, now we're on number 9, that it's social anxiety. And that parental criticism, the idea is that I'll critique you enough so that you'll build this sense of self-confidence, that you'll want to aspire to achieve these great things. But really what happens is that you internalize this sense of fear of criticism. You also worry about other people's opinions and upsetting them. So your concept of self is very fluctuating. And you could even develop, for those with BPD, they end up developing this unstable self-image, which is they're not really sure who they are or where they fit in the world. So you have this intense social anxiety, which is that I don't have the value to engage with others. So I question, where do I fit in the world? And you have a lot of anxious symptoms that, well, I want to be with people, but I don't know if I should be with people, and where can I be with people? And people are very scary and dangerous, so who could I be with and who's going to help me? And that's fed by that family and that parental criticism. You develop this sense of social anxiety where you don't feel like you are confident and competent to engage with the world outside, to achieve your social goals, to socially engage with others in an effective way. Got to push back on that stuff. Absolutely. Takes us to our next one, the sense of comparison. And when we talk about parental criticism and that comparison, what happens is in that you end up over-relying on comparison to others. Because when you were brought up, it was constant criticism. Well, you weren't just blandly or blindly criticized. You were typically compared to someone else and how you faltered and presumably how they succeeded. Interestingly, that this isn't someone in your life. A lot of times you could be compared to a great baseball player, right? Altuve. You could be compared to a great football player, right? Eli Manning. Some Giants fan, if you can figure that out, please, no sense for comments or anything unnecessary. Thank you. But when we talk about that comparison, then you always compare yourself. But this goes back to that negative perspective, because the comparison isn't, wow, they were able to do this. Maybe I could utilize some of those strategies to help me overcome it. Instead, what happens is it's the comparison, how you fail and what's wrong with you, what's broken inside of you that the other person presumably has. A lot of times people think that, like, sports is a great example, that people that achieve a lot, that are very successful in sports, that they don't practice much, or they never practiced very much, or they did very little to get it. That is actually the opposite. The superstars that we know, your Kobe Bryant's, your Eli Manning's, or, other sports stars, Tom Brady, things like that. People that really were able to achieve and excel, they dedicate a lot of time, a lot of effort, whether guitar playing, painting, studying, science, research, whatever it is. But when we do the comparison, we think, oh, well, they just woke up in the morning and they were magically able to do it. So I'm constantly at a loss and I'm just a constant failure. So that comparison enhances the sense of inadequacy as you compare yourself to others. And we definitely want to be careful of that. And then it can also create constant apologizing. Now, I have a video on this. I'll put a link here. But in parental criticism, what happens is you're constantly apologizing for who you are, for the things that you've done, even though you haven't done anything wrong. And a lot of times this can be for even I understand, even if it's a simple mistake, right? That, you left something out for someone to pick up. Okay, oh, I'm sorry, I had to do that. Okay. But a lot of times then you go inward, right? And you self-attack, and that constant apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry. You're also contending with that family in the head that's telling you, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you left that out for them to have to do it. I can't believe, and it's that family in the head that's feeding that negative perception of self, which then causes you to apologize. You want to resist that habit, and it can become very, very habitual very fast. So you want to resist that. Don't fall into that stuff. Very bad, very bad. Number 12, trust issues. And this is when you grow up with a lot of parental criticism, you internalize that, and it's hard to trust people that are constantly pointing out what you're doing or did wrong, because how can they feel like they're on your side? Oh, but, it's what's best for you, or, well, I'm telling you the truth. Well, what about the positives? The positives have to be the truth too. It's not just a one-sided coin. There's two sides. There might be a negative, but then there's also a positive. So what else is there? And, these trust issues can really impact romantic relationships, friendships, work relationships, because how can I bond with you, which is required for all relationships to varying degrees, if I don't trust you? And I can't trust you because you're going to overly focus on the negative, and then you're going to critique me, and then I'm going to feel like this kid who can't do anything right. And it just enhances this sense of shame, fear, doubt, and you often feel rejected or abandoned. So we have to start by combating that stuff, combating those beliefs in our head that what our parental critics told us was right. And last, number 13, difficulty regulating emotions. And what happens is, because of that parental criticism, that constant negativity, it's this wave of just negativity, and it's constant and it's intense. And because it's become part of you, it's that internal critic, right? It's that family in the head. And you constantly have this sense of stress, anger, sadness. So you feel like no matter what you're doing, you can't stay afloat, and you can't breathe underwater. So that becomes your life, that you're trying to breathe underwater or get to the surface to where you can at least get some air, get some breath, but you can't So what happens is you feel this intensity, right? This intensity wrapped all around you because it's this constant internalized criticism. It's this constant just negativity and intensity of forcing you to stay in place. And when you're forced to stay in place, you feel lost, you feel locked, you feel uncertain with who you are and where you're going. So now that we've gone through the 13, what are you going to do about it? Okay, here's the thing. First and foremost, you got to recognize that there is a family in the head, that you have a chorus in your brain, that you have internalized the parental criticism. Not a bad thing. That's just what happens. We're adaptive creatures. We adapt to negative environments. If we're brought up in one, if we experience a lot of negative environments, we adapt to them. Adapt doesn't necessarily mean that it is suddenly healthy or good. It means that you were able to survive it. You did what you had to do to survive it. And sometimes as we're growing up, when we are criticized a lot, we internalize it so that then we hope to mitigate, lessen the criticism. Problem is it doesn't really work that way, and it may have worked when we were little so that we're not as surprised and we don't feel as alone and we don't feel as rejected and we don't feel as abandoned and we don't feel so much shame, things like that. So we have to first recognize family in the head comes from that parental criticism. Next, what you got to do is you have to push back. You're going to have to challenge it. If it says that you're a loser, wrong. What kind of things are you doing right? What things have you done right? And you'll say, well, I don't do anything right. That's absolutely not true. That's what's called a split. And I'll leave a video here at the end about splitting so you could learn more about it as well. But importantly, remember, you got to push back and be as clear and directed at your reframe or your pushback as you can, which means that if it's something negative, you're going to reframe it as a positive, right? Oh, you'll never get this right. Well, instead of with the never, what I would say, you know what? I'm going to do the best I can right now. If I don't get it, I'm going to keep at it. I'm just going to keep doing it till I get it right, right? I mean, that's how Kobe did it. That's how sports people do it. That's how scientists do it. That's how whatever. All of us did it. We all stumble along the way, and that's normal, and that's natural. And that doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're broken. Got to push back on it. Then, as you push back on it, I want you to do it as much as you can. It's not going to be perfect. Don't get that idea of perfectionism. Don't do that. Allow yourself, you're going to have, some days you're going to catch it, some days you're not. The more you catch it, the better you get at it. And keep at it. Stay with it. Don't give up. You are worth it. You have to internalize that idea of sense of good worth. And if there are people around you that are highly critical, maybe let them leave your life. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Absolutely. Absolutely. But you need to surround yourself with people who move you forward, not those who keep, going back to our drowning example, who keep pushing your head underwater. That's not what you want. Not at all. I hope this was helpful. Leave some comments. I'm going to also put that video here that can also help you and figure out how to do things differently. Thanks. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.